Ethan Caldwell was not just any tourist. He was a rich, famous influencer known for his wild pranks and over-the-top lifestyle. He had millions of followers who loved watching him travel the world, spending money carelessly, and pulling risky stunts just to get views. His social media accounts were filled with videos of him making fun of traditions, pranking strangers, and showing off his expensive cars, watches, and designer clothes. Everywhere he went, he believed he was above the rules. When Ethan arrived in London, he was excited but also looking for his next big viral video. He had already done almost everything. Pretending to be a celebrity in New York, sneaking into exclusive parties in Dubai, and even challenging a professional boxer to a match just for laughs. But this time, he wanted to do something different, something bold, something that no one had dared to do before. His assistant, Ryan, had been researching ideas, and that's when he found something that caught Ethan's attention: the Queen's Guard. These soldiers were famous for standing perfectly still, never reacting to anything, no matter how much people tried to distract them. Tourists loved taking pictures with them, and some even tried to make them laugh. But the guards never moved. Ethan saw this as the perfect opportunity. "Imagine the views if I can make one of them react," Ethan said with a smirk. "What if I do something crazy? Like really crazy?" Ryan hesitated. "I don't know, man. These guys take their job seriously. It might not be a good idea." But Ethan wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind. He believed that the world was his playground, and he could do whatever he wanted. He didn't think about respect or consequences, only about the number of likes, shares, and comments his next video would get. The next morning, Ethan and his crew headed toward Buckingham Palace, where the guards were stationed. The sun was shining, and the streets were filled with tourists taking pictures and enjoying the historic sights. Ethan wore designer sunglasses, a luxury watch, and a confident smile. He walked through the crowd, looking for the perfect guard to target. Then he saw him, a tall, disciplined soldier in a red uniform and a black bearskin hat. The guard stood completely still, his eyes focused straight ahead, his hands gripping his rifle. He looked like a statue, emotionless and unshakable. Ethan grinned. "This is it. This is the one." He pulled out a small can of red paint from his bag, holding it up for the camera. His crew whispered nervously behind him, unsure if this was a good idea. Some people in the crowd noticed and started watching, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Ethan turned to the camera, winked, and whispered, "This is going to be legendary." Then, without a second thought, he stepped forward, ready to do something that would change his life forever. Ethan felt a rush of excitement as he stepped closer to the royal guard. The bright red paint in his hand felt cool against his fingers, and his heart raced with anticipation. He imagined the reaction he would get online. The millions of views, the shocked comments, the media attention. This was going to be his biggest prank yet. His cameraman adjusted the angle, making sure to capture everything perfectly. Ryan, his assistant, stood a few steps behind, shifting nervously. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered. "Maybe we should just do a normal prank, like pretending to trip in front of the guard or something." Ethan scoffed. "Normal pranks don't go viral. This will." The crowd around them started to grow. A few tourists noticed Ethan and recognized him. Some even pulled out their phones, expecting to witness one of his famous stunts. The air was thick with curiosity as people waited to see what would happen. Ethan took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the paint can, and stepped even closer to the guard. The soldier stood tall, completely still, his posture perfect. His uniform was spotless: red coat, golden buttons, and neatly pressed trousers. His black bearskin hat sat high on his head, making him look even more imposing. His face showed no emotion. Ethan smirked. "Let's see if he can ignore this." Without hesitation, he tilted the can and poured the thick, red paint over the guard's shoulder. It dripped down his uniform in slow, bright streaks, standing out against the deep red of his coat. The audience gasped. A few people covered their mouths in shock. Others raised their phones, recording the moment. But the guard did not move. He did not flinch. He did not react at all. His training was too strong, his discipline unbreakable. He remained standing, his gaze fixed straight ahead, as if nothing had happened. Ethan expected laughter, maybe even applause, but instead, silence filled the air. The crowd was not amused. Their expressions shifted from surprise to anger. Someone muttered, "That's not funny." Another person whispered, "That's just wrong." Ryan grabbed Ethan's arm. "We need to go. Now." Ethan laughed, still unaware of the trouble he was in. "Relax, man. It's just a joke. He doesn't even care." But before he could say another word, the situation changed. A group of uniformed police officers appeared, pushing through the crowd with serious expressions. Their radios buzzed, and their eyes locked onto Ethan. In that moment, he realized this was no longer just a prank. A sharp voice cut through the air. "Sir, put the can down and step away." Ethan's confidence wavered. He looked at the officers, then back at his cameraman, as if expecting someone to tell him it was all part of the joke. But the officers were not joking. The people in the crowd moved aside, giving the officers space as they closed in. Ethan swallowed hard. His hands felt sweaty. The weight of the cameras, the onlookers, and the sudden realization of what he had done pressed down on him. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Ethan stood frozen as the officers moved toward him. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had been in tricky situations before. Security guards kicking him out of malls, hotel managers banning him for pranks. But this felt different. The officers looked serious, and the crowd wasn't laughing. One of the officers, a tall man with sharp eyes, spoke firmly. "Sir, drop the can and step back." Ethan hesitated, then slowly let the empty paint can fall from his hand. It hit the pavement with a small clang, splattering the last few drops of red paint. His camera crew had already lowered their equipment, realizing this wasn't going as planned. Ryan, his assistant, took a small step back, as if hoping to distance himself from the situation. The officer continued, "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, hold on. It was just a joke, a prank. No harm done, right?" He forced a laugh, hoping to ease the tension, but no one was smiling. A second officer moved in. "You defaced a state official's uniform. That's vandalism. You're under arrest." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. Arrest? This wasn't how things were supposed to go. In his mind, he had imagined the guard finally reacting. The crowd laughing, maybe even a light scolding from a security officer. But handcuffs. That wasn't part of the plan. As the officers grabbed his arms and secured the cuffs around his wrists, the crowd murmured. Some people shook their heads in disapproval. Others recorded the moment, already posting it online. Ethan felt his stomach sink. "This is crazy," he muttered. "It was just for content." The officer guiding him toward the police vehicle didn't respond. He simply opened the door and gestured for Ethan to get in. Ryan and the camera crew watched helplessly, unsure if they should follow or run. As Ethan slid into the back seat of the police car, the reality of the situation sank in. The streets of London, which had felt like his playground just moments ago, now felt like a trap. Through the window, he saw the royal guard still standing tall, untouched by the chaos around him. The red paint dripped down his uniform, but his posture remained firm. He hadn't moved an inch. Ethan swallowed hard. He had spent years building his image as a fearless prankster, but now, sitting in the back of a police car, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Powerless. The car engine rumbled to life, and as they drove away, he saw the last thing he wanted to see, his name already trending online. But instead of fame, it was attached to something else. Disgrace. As the police car moved through the streets of London, Ethan sat in the back seat, his hands still cuffed behind him. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. This wasn't the first time he had been in trouble, but something about this felt different. The officers weren't laughing, the crowd hadn't cheered, and there was no easy way out. He glanced at the officer driving. Look, I get it. Maybe that wasn't the smartest move, but come on, it was just a joke. I didn't mean any harm. The officer didn't even turn his head. Tell that to the judge. Ethan swallowed hard. The word sent a chill down his spine. Judge. That meant court. Court meant real legal trouble. He had always thought of himself as untouchable, someone who could pay a fine, apologize on camera, and move on to the next big thing. But this time, he wasn't so sure. When they arrived at the police station, everything happened quickly. His personal belongings were taken, his expensive watch, his phone, his wallet. He was led to a small holding cell with nothing but a metal bench and a cold concrete floor. For the first time in years, there were no cameras, no followers, no luxury, just silence. Hours passed. Ethan had no idea what time it was, and no one came to update him. He tapped his foot anxiously, thinking about what was happening outside. His team was probably scrambling to get him out. His name was all over the internet, and his followers were surely defending him, right? Wrong. When the officers finally took him to a small interrogation room, his lawyer was already waiting. The middle-aged man in a dark suit, he didn't look happy. He placed a stack of papers on the table and sighed. Ethan, do you have any idea how bad this is? Ethan forced a smirk. Come on, man. It's just some paint. We can spin this, right? A simple apology video. Maybe a donation to charity. I've been through worse. The lawyer shook his head. No, you haven't. He slid his phone across the table. Take a look. Ethan hesitated before picking it up. The screen was filled with headlines from major news outlets. Disrespect or pure arrogance. Influencer arrested after pouring paint on royal guard. Public outrage as social media star vandalizes British heritage. Sponsors drop Ethan Caldwell following Buckingham Palace incident. His heart sank. He scrolled through the comments. Thousands of people calling him irresponsible, disrespectful, and a disgrace. Even some of his most loyal fans were turning against him. The lawyer's voice was firm. The British government is taking this seriously. This isn't just vandalism. It's an insult to a national institution. They're making an example out of you. Ethan sat back, feeling the weight of his mistake settle on his shoulders. He had spent years chasing fame, pushing limits, and believing he was untouchable. But now, sitting in a cold interrogation room, he realized something terrifying. This time, he might not be able to escape the consequences. Ethan sat in the cold interrogation room, staring at the headlines on the lawyer's phone. His name was everywhere, but not in the way he had hoped. He had always wanted to be famous, to be talked about, to be the center of attention. But not like this. His lawyer cleared his throat, bringing Ethan back to reality. Listen carefully, he said, his voice firm. The charges against you are serious. Vandalism alone could mean a fine, but because this involved a royal guard, the government sees it as an act of public disorder and disrespect. You're facing multiple charges, and they're not going easy on you. Ethan frowned. Okay, but what's the worst that could happen? I mean, I can just pay a fine, apologize, and leave, right? The lawyer sighed, rubbing his temples. Not this time. The judge has already denied bail. That means you're staying in custody until your trial. Ethan's stomach dropped. What? That's insane. I've seen people do way worse and walk free. The lawyer leaned forward. That's the point. The British government wants to send a message. They're making an example out of you. You embarrassed a respected institution in front of the world, and they're showing that there are consequences, no matter how rich or famous you are. Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling trapped. He had always believed that money, fame, and influence could get him out of anything. But now, none of that seemed to matter. Meanwhile, outside the police station, the world was turning against him. His sponsors were pulling their deals one by one. Major brands that had once paid him millions didn't want to be associated with him anymore. His management team was in damage control mode, but nothing was working. Social media was even worse. The same followers who had once idolized him were now attacking him. People were calling for boycotts, demanding that he be banned from social platforms. Some of his biggest fans were saying they were disappointed, that they had looked up to him, but now saw him as nothing more than a reckless troublemaker. Even celebrities and other influencers were speaking out. Some called his actions disrespectful, while others said this was the moment influencers needed to learn that their actions had real consequences. Ethan's lawyer continued. Right now, the prosecution is pushing for the maximum penalty, 6 months in prison followed by deportation. That's what we're up against. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Prison. He had never even considered that as a possibility. Community service. Sure. A fine. Maybe. But actual jail time. That wasn't supposed to happen to people like him. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized he had no control over what happened next. No amount of money, followers, or fancy lawyers could undo what he had done. He had played the game for too long, always believing he was untouchable. But now, reality had finally caught up to him, and there was no way to run from it. Ethan sat alone in his holding cell, staring at the blank wall in front of him. His mind was racing, but no matter how hard he tried to think of a way out, he knew there was nothing he could do. His entire life had changed in just a few hours. One prank, one stupid decision, had turned everything upside down. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Moments later, the door to his cell opened, and his lawyer stepped in. He had a serious expression, holding a folder in his hands. Ethan sat up quickly. "Tell me you have good news." The lawyer shook his head. "Not exactly. The prosecution is moving fast. The trial is set for next week." Ethan's heart sank. "That soon?" "Yes. The British government wants to show the public that they are taking this seriously. They're treating it as a criminal act, not just a prank. There's a lot of public pressure to punish you." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling inside him. "This is insane. It was just some paint. I didn't hurt anyone." The lawyer sighed. "It's not just about the paint. It's about what it represents. The Royal Guards are a symbol of the country's history and respect. You didn't just mess with a person. You insulted a national tradition in front of the world." Ethan stayed silent, staring at the floor. He had never thought about it that way. To him, it had just been another viral stunt, another way to get people talking. He had never considered how deeply it could offend people. The lawyer continued. "Listen, we need to plan our defense carefully. Right now, the prosecution has strong evidence against you. The video, the police reports, the public reaction. If we don't handle this properly, you could face months in prison." Ethan swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" "You need to show genuine remorse. Not an apology video for your fans, not something scripted. You need to prove to the court that you understand what you did was wrong. And that means cooperating fully, showing respect, and accepting responsibility." Ethan frowned. "You mean I have to act sorry?" The lawyer's face hardened. "No, Ethan. You have to be sorry. If you don't take this seriously, no judge is going to go easy on you. This is real life, not a prank channel. If you don't change your attitude, you're going to regret it." Ethan leaned back, his thoughts spinning. His whole career had been built on pushing limits, on never apologizing, on always being the guy who didn't care. But now, for the first time, he was being forced to care. As the lawyer left, Ethan lay down on the hard bench, staring up at the ceiling. The reality of his situation was hitting him harder than ever. His fame, his wealth, his fans, none of it mattered here. For the first time in his life, Ethan had to face the truth. and for the first time, he had no control over what happened next. Ethan sat in the courtroom, his hands gripping the edge of the wooden table in front of him. The room was packed, reporters, cameras, and members of the public all watching his every move. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his face calm. He had been in front of cameras his whole life, but this time was different. This time, he wasn't in control of the story. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes, cleared his throat. "Mr. Caldwell, you are charged with vandalizing a Royal Guard's uniform and disrupting public order. How do you plead?" Ethan hesitated, then spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Guilty, Your Honor." A murmur spread through the room. He could hear reporters typing, cameras clicking. He had considered fighting the charges, but his lawyer had convinced him otherwise. There was too much evidence, too much public anger. The best he could do now was damage control. The prosecution stood up. "Your Honor, this was not an accident or a misunderstanding. The defendant intentionally poured paint on a Royal Guard for online attention. This was an act of disrespect, not just to the soldier but to the country's traditions." Ethan shifted uncomfortably as the prosecutor continued. "This was not a harmless prank. The Guard's uniform is a symbol of honor, and replacing it comes at a cost. Furthermore, this stunt disrupted the public, wasted police resources, and encouraged reckless behavior among young followers." Ethan clenched his jaw. He wanted to argue, to say it wasn't that deep, but he knew that would only make things worse. His lawyer had warned him. This wasn't the time to defend his actions. It was time to take responsibility. When the prosecution finished, his lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, my client deeply regrets his actions. He understands now that his stunt was not only irresponsible, but also disrespectful. He is prepared to make amends in any way the court sees fit." The judge turned to Ethan. "Mr. Caldwell, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Ethan stood, his legs feeling unsteady. He took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that could change everything. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady but softer than usual, "I want to say that I'm truly sorry. At the time, I thought I was just making content, just doing something that would get views. I didn't think about the meaning behind it. I didn't think about the people I was hurting or the traditions I was disrespecting." He swallowed hard. But sitting in that cell, reading what people were saying, hearing how much this upset people, I understand now. I made a huge mistake, and I accept whatever punishment the court decides. The courtroom was silent. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't performing for views. He wasn't cracking jokes or trying to go viral. He was just standing there, waiting for judgment. The judge nodded slowly. "I will consider your words carefully before delivering my verdict." Ethan sat back down, his hands still shaking. All he could do now was wait. Ethan sat in the courtroom, his heart pounding as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. The past few days had felt like a blur. His arrest, the public outrage, the long nights in a cold cell. Now, everything came down to this moment. The judge cleared his throat, his expression serious. "Mr. Caldwell, your actions were reckless and showed a lack of respect for an institution that represents centuries of history. However, the court acknowledges that you have taken responsibility and shown remorse." Ethan held his breath. Taking all factors into account, the court has decided on the following sentence: a fine of £50,000 to cover damages and legal costs, 200 hours of community service, and a 6-month ban from entering the United Kingdom. A murmur spread through the room. Ethan let out a slow breath, relief washing over him. He had feared prison, but instead, he had been given a chance to make things right. The judge continued, "You are also required to publicly apologize and participate in an awareness campaign about responsible online behavior." Ethan nodded quickly. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand." With that, the trial ended. Ethan's lawyer patted his shoulder. "You got lucky," he muttered. "If you had acted arrogant in there, things could have gone much worse." As Ethan walked out of the courtroom, Reporters swarmed him, shouting questions. Cameras flashed, capturing every step he took. He had been in front of flashing cameras many times before, but this time, he wasn't smiling. Later that day, he sat in front of a camera for a different kind of video. Not a prank, not a challenge, but a sincere apology. He looked straight into the lens. "I messed up," he said. "There's no excuse for what I did. I was careless, and I hurt a lot of people with my actions. I want to apologize to the Royal Guard, to the people of the UK, and to my followers who expected better from me." He took a deep breath. "I've learned that actions have consequences, and this isn't just about losing sponsors or getting banned from a country. It's about realizing that being an influencer comes with responsibility. I let my ego and my chase for views take over, and I regret it." The video went viral, but not in the way his old videos did. Some people forgave him. Others said it was too late. But for the first time, Ethan didn't care about the views. He cared about being better. In the following months, he completed his community service, working with organizations that taught young people about responsible social media use. It wasn't easy, but it gave him time to reflect. When his 6-month ban ended, Ethan had changed. He still made content, but not the reckless kind. He had lost some followers, but he had gained something more important: self-awareness. His mistake had cost him, but in the end, it had also taught him the biggest lesson of his life.